Hello and welcome to Books Up Close. I'm Chris Lloyd. This is the close reading show for readers, writers, and anyone interested in how text get made. In today's episode, I talked to Carys Davies about her 2024 novel, Clear. We talk about a passage part of the way through. It's on page 51. Listeners, if you want to go get your copy and then you can read along, that's in the paperback. Carys is the author of 3 novels and 2 collections of short stories. Her latest novel, Clear, won the 2025 Royal Society of Literature Ondaatje Prize, the 2025 Wales Book of the Year, and the 2025 Prix du Meilleur Livre Étranger in France. If that's bad pronunciation, don't question me. She is currently a fellow at Columbia University's Institute for Ideas and Imagination in Paris. Carys, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. And listeners, when I started this project, I had a list of those authors that I wanted to talk to. You were on that list, Carys, because I think of your books more than many, you seem to really care about sentences, right? Not that most authors don't, but your books to me are so distilled, right? They're very short books and each sentence is very carefully weighed. So I was really excited to hear from you and talk to you about this because I think you care about language in a very particular way.
Yes, I do. I do. And when I read, I'm always thinking, if something's having an effect on me, I'm always thinking, how's that happening?
Yeah.
What's this? This isn't happening by accident.
Exactly. And this is the kind of show where I'm like, how is that happening? What's going on here? Did we intend it? Is it a bit of the magic of the writing process? So I'm really interested in all of those things. Before we go to the passage, how do you feel about close reading as an activity, a practice?
Yeah, I suppose in a sort of hyper academic way, I think sometimes it can go a little far into almost the sort of slightly absurd realms. Although, against that, I would say if that's what a reader is taking out of it, then that's their privilege and I have no control over that whatsoever. But I think what's interesting for me, and what was very interesting for me looking at this passage that you chose, is that what strikes me is that that there are things that I was conscious of doing very deliberately, but there were also other things that I was less conscious of doing deliberately, but perhaps more instinctively. But I'm so interested in word choices, and perhaps it's because I wrote short stories for a long time, more than 20 years before I wrote my first novel. If a word is there, then it has to be working hard and probably doing more than just one thing. And in any sentence, in any paragraph, you're always kind of perpetually spinning the plates of time and place and character and story, and each word and phrase and paragraph is moving that along somehow. So no, I think it's fascinating to have a really close look at how the words are working.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about the move from the short story to then like the short novel. Do you call them novellas? The Clear West? What do you call them?
I mean, I honestly, I don't care what people call them. People do call them novellas, but I've looked for definitions of novellas and they seem to range from anything from 40 pages to, 120 pages. And, a long Alice Munro story, is that a novella? Or I think she always called them short stories. But so I think of them as short novels, because I don't know, to me, a novella is probably something that's a little bit more focused in one time and place. And my novels, although they're short, they tend to be a little bit more expansive than that, and have a few more characters, though not very many.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but do they always arrive in your mind as short, or is that how they come out? Like, are you ever thinking, wow, this could be...
I mean, they don't. Well, they don't arrive in my mind as anything very much. They arrive as something very small and some kind of complicated situation, and then I just see where that takes me. And I think so. No, I don't sort of say to myself, "Oh, this is going to be short." But I'm writing my fourth novel now, and it will probably be about the same length as Clear at West. The Mission House was slightly longer, but I think this is my sort of around 30,000 words that I can hold that in my head, and I can feel the sort of the drama and the emotion and the movement. And I think if it was longer, I would feel it was getting away from me. So for me, that it just feels like the perfect way to tell the stories that I want to tell. But every story is as short or as long as it needs to be. So
yeah, no, I'm just always interested, like the people that can do the fact you can do so much in 147 pages. I'm always like, how did you do that? Like how? Like anyway, we can get into those things. We're going to talk about a passage from chapter 19. Why don't we hear it first, and then we can start tackling it.
Ivor could never say for sure exactly when he began to transfer his affections from Mary to John Ferguson. He could never say if it happened little by little in the course of those first few days while his unexpected visitor drifted in and out of sleep, or when he found himself one evening reaching for the stranger's battered black coat, wanting to repair it. He could never say if it happened on the morning of the fourth day, while he watched John Ferguson shuffling unhappily through his dried-out papers. But the feeling he had was that it happened quite suddenly, just before that, when John Ferguson woke up and lifted his head and looked at him for the first time squarely in the face. What's undoubtedly true is how powerfully he was affected in that moment, that nothing perhaps could have quite prepared him for it. It was so long since anyone but Strachan had looked at him properly, and if he'd been asked to describe his feelings, he might have reached for that word in his language that described what happens when a rock is covered and uncovered by the sea, when briefly the water rises up and submerges it completely before it falls away again and reveals it. It was how Ivor felt when the wave of emotion crashed over him. He was engulfed by it. His breathing stopped, and there was a long stalled moment before he broke free and breathed again. When John Ferguson gestured to him to pass him his papers, he gave them to him, and then he sat in his great chair, watching him.
Thank you so much. When I first read this book, I think I gulped it down in like 2 sittings. Like annoyingly, I had to like go and do something else, but there is a real propulsion to this book. There's 2 to 3 kind of main characters here in this passage. We're thinking about 2 of them, Ivor and John Ferguson. John Ferguson is a minister, for people who haven't read it, and he's going to this remote Scottish island to ask this man Ivor to leave, basically, but things go wrong from the very beginning. And these 2 men are kind of put into close proximity in Ivor's little hut house thing. And this is such a book about like intimacy in so many different ways. And I think I picked this section because it's one of those really quiet moments. There's lots of quiet moments in this book, and I just thought it was just like a really beautiful moment of seeing into someone's mind. But, and this is what I want to kind of talk about with you, is when we're in one of the characters' voices and when we're in narrator's voice, right? Because this is all third person, but we slip in and out in really interesting ways. But yeah, I wondered before even that, like, what did you think about this passage when I suggested this one to you?
So the first thing that really, I mean, I always remember the start of this particular passage because I can still remember writing that first line. Ivor could never say for sure exactly when he began to transfer his affections from Mary to John Ferguson, because that came as a complete bolt from the blue. I was not expecting that to happen, because just for anyone who hasn't read the book, just prior to this, Ivor initially doesn't know that John's arrived on the island. He hasn't met him yet, but he finds his bag, and in it a picture of a woman who he assumes to be John's wife. And it's actually a very early photograph, and he's completely overwhelmed by its photograph, and he kind of falls in love with Mary. And then I wrote this line because I guess by this time, so John has had an accident. He's injured, and Ivor is caring for him, as you say, in the hut. and it is a very intimate situation. It's kind of like a kind of almost like patient and nurse, or mother and child, or it's, it could be so many different things, but it is very, it is kind of intimate and physical. And this line just came, and I just thought, okay, so that, the situation was already complicated. Now it's a lot more complicated. And I love that. I love it when things get difficult and complicated. And I know that my characters are going to have to figure things out.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that struck me. And as you said, I did really notice reading through, I did notice how you're kind of writing with a camera, which is, it's sometimes, close for third person, it's right here on the shoulder, and then it's kind of moving back and it's moving. And I think there's just, you always want kind of light and shade, and a kind of variation in pace, and I like that with point of view. And I like, I like telling. There are moments when there's nothing better than just a very simple, ordinary seeming sentence like that first one, which actually contains multitudes of complexity. But it's just kind of almost like throwing down a gauntlet, just this very simple, quite authorial sentence. And I almost think of these scenes where they're together in the hut. They're almost like, they're very visual. They're almost like paintings, and in this kind of lamplight. And it just seemed right that there was this sort of slightly more distant third person watching these two men in this little space.
I'm glad you said that about like the lamplight and the image, because they are like these little tableau, right? And each chapter is quite short too. They're these little glimpses of moments, right? Of like things hinging on a look, or a they're not talking to each other for much of this book because they're not speaking the same language mostly.
Yeah, which was a real challenge when I realized what I'd sort of got myself into. But then, as so often happens with a story, or it's what seems really difficult and really problematic that kind of releases something really sort of amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's that opening line. Ivor could never say for sure exactly when. It's like a really interesting pace and like rhythm to that opening.
Right.
But Ivor could never say for sure. That kind of sounds like his thinking, right? Like his language, but kind of not. And really interesting that like he could never say for sure, given that they don't speak very much in this book. Like it's quite interesting that it's like he could never say for sure, as though someone had asked him this question, right? It's like really, it's such a funny line of kind of,
right.
Well, as though someone was saying, when did you first experience this thing?
Yeah, it's also, I mean, I think, going back to that thing about them being these series of little scenes. So they're very, I like my stories to be kind of in the moment, but very aware of the past and the future. And what I liked about that first sentence is that it gives you the feeling that there is some point in the future where I was going to be looking back at this, and we don't, and when I wrote it I didn't know what that future moment would look like, but it's this kind of sense of, as you say, sort of forward propulsion.
Yeah, there's that tiny little bit of a gap between, wait, are we going to find something out? Who is he speaking? Who would he be speaking to? And still at page 51, you're kind of like, wait, where is this going? Because even the word affections in that line, that's not quite desire.
No.
Right? Similarly, when he like wants to repair the coat, although desire and wanting and affections, they're very close to each other, but they're not quite the same. And clearly he feels something for Mary that is more bordering on like, wow, this woman is beautiful, right? Like, who is she? She's entrancing. I'm going to put her picture on my wall. But equally, he's then entranced by this man in a way that is not, what I love about this book, it's not reducible to sexuality or identity or gender, any of the kind of contemporary identitarian concepts we have, right? It's kind of something beyond his own language, as he said. Like, he could never say when it happened, but also I don't even know if he could describe the thing. He has to use a word about the sea, right? As
Yeah.
you say later on.
Yeah. And I think, and that's, the coat and his, later, he knits John a hat and some socks, and and he helps him to pee, and he feeds him, and it's and there is a sentence later on where it sort of describes him feeling like he was kind of partly a mother, partly a father, partly a sister, brother. It's just this, the kind of affection, I suppose.
The other thing that's notable in that first line, which happens throughout the book, and I still haven't settled on where it is coming from, but that he's always named John Ferguson, like in full.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like it's always Ivor, and it's always John Ferguson. Even in John's own chapters, when people are referring to him, it's kind of like John Ferguson. Like, and I've been thinking about that since like I started reading it, that there's I don't know, that like he needs his full like honorific or something, or there's something about his identity that is like, I am John Ferguson, right? It's almost like I don't know, like a trace of patriarchy or a trace of like who he is in the world, his standing.
To be honest, that choice felt much more instinctive than rational. It just, every time, I don't know, it just felt like the right thing to say John Ferguson. And maybe it just, the weight of their relationship, John Ferguson, and then it's just Ivor, that there's something in that. But I think that was one of those instinctive rather than rational decisions.
Yeah, it's just so interesting, the kind of like, he is always fully named, as though there is something about like the naming as something like proper. And I think the book really shows him as like, he doesn't get his properness, right? His papers dissolve in the water very quickly. I don't know who he is, what his role is. He's like really kind of stripped of all of the trappings of the mainland, if you like, of like regular life. So I think it's really interesting that the narrative voice is like, no, but he's John Ferguson.
Yes, but yes, and even his coat, his black Presbyterian coat, it has these pink knitted sleeves. That's true about his name.
I really liked it when I read it, and I'm just like, what is going on there, Carys? But anyway, the passage then carries on. You've got quite short paragraphs. I think it's also worth saying that you don't write big dense paragraphs often in this book. Like, they're often kind of broken up in a way that has a kind of pacing effect, I think, about like taking breath. The next two paragraphs, you kind of begin with the same line. He could never say if it happened. He could never say if it happened. So I think there's a lovely like repetition there from that kind of early sentence, as you say, which is quite direct, to then moving into something a bit more poetic, like drifted in and out of sleep, or when he found himself, one evening, reaching for the stranger's battered black coat, wanting to repair it. You've got like alliteration, you've got like these really soft sounds running throughout, you've got the commas. So there's a real, he could never say if it happened, like he's struggling to find the moment. And even the sound of the sentences become wistful, if you like, to me. There's something about the softness of his thought, if you like.
I feel there's a lot of emotion there. There's sort of the shuffling unhappily. There's anxiety and cowardice, maybe, and sort of bit of sorrow on John's part. But there's also with such short chapters, one of the challenges was at the same time to convey the passage of time. So this was also a way of just saying, these things happened and this happened, and giving a sense of this kind of domestic kind of routine, I suppose, that they develop before this kind of sudden, the sort of moment where he looks at Ivor full in the face. There's a sort of lull, and then it happens.
Yeah. The feeling he had was that it had happened quite suddenly, just before. There's a real, while we're again in the narrator's voice, it's like the narrator is almost like embodying his thinking, looking back at the moment, like the feeling he had was that it had happened, not like, oh no, it was that, I know it was that moment. There's a real struggle towards trying to figure it out. And I think the sentences are almost embodying some of that, thinking it out.
Yeah, it's getting more inside him, but there is still this kind of distance, because when Ivor starts to, because later on John starts to write down some of the words in Ivor's language as Ivor is teaching them to him, and Ivor's never thought of language as being these things that he can see, these written things. So, where it says, that if he'd been asked to describe his feelings, he might have reached for that word, but there's a kind of distance, because Ivor doesn't really think about language in the way that we might think about language, but at the same time he might have had a kind of visceral feeling of being like a rock that's submerged by water, and then emerging, spluttering from it again. So it's both very close and interior, but also there's a bit of distance too.
Yeah, like this is a book about articulatability in a way. Like how do you say the thing? Like, do you have language for the thing? And even if you did have language for the thing, could you put it to the thing itself, right?
Yes.
Yes. Can one say the moment that you notice something in someone else that you're drawn to? Like, can you describe it precisely? Like, I think most people would say no, or like it was a feeling, right? It was a sensation, or it was a night, maybe. Yeah. Like, I went out with someone, we had drinks all night. It was like the whole night, right? But he's here trying to be like, when is the moment?
Yeah.
Could I capture it? And even if I had the language, could I capture it?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I loved about Ivor's language is that there were a few words which meant, which specifically referred to, like there was one that means, the last moment of night before day begins, and the last moment before the tide turns, and as if his language is particularly interested in that specific moment when something happens, which I think in a kind of unconscious way maybe is sort of there in the story.
Yeah, 100%. And amongst all of this, it's the moment when John looks him squarely in the face. It's the moment when they're actually confronted with one another's reality, with their like physicality, is the moment that things change, right? Like we can grasp the language all we want, but it's looking eye to eye, right?
Yes.
I could get very theoretical and talk about Levinas right now, and like the face as the moment of like understanding the other, but there is a real sense of like face to face. What happens when we see the other that we have no real knowledge of? We have no real sense of their interiority.
No, exactly. None. I mean, that's the mystery of being human.
Yeah,
we can never have that. And also, I suppose here we're only really getting Ivor's side of the story. Yeah. John is doing the looking, but there's no mention of any wave crashing over him. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's one of the really fun things about this book, is that the chapters kind of alternate in perspective, even while you're still in the third person, right? You're kind of drifting back and forth between them. You see this kind of like dance back and forth, and we're given lots of, I don't know, dramatic irony, I guess. Like we know things more than the characters do most of the time, but nonetheless, you're still hesitatingly moving forward with them in a way as a reader. And I think that's really nice. Like we're not just giving like, here's the whole sweep. Like we know Mary's gonna try and come at some point, but like we don't know if she's gonna make it. We don't know what's gonna happen. So there's lots of it's like you give us a little bit and then you're like, I'm not going to give you the rest. And I love that.
But I mean, nor does she. I mean, I don't, I don't like those kind of tricks where things are sort of deliberately withheld from the reader for the sake of tension, I mean, and I think most of that irony and tension comes from, we know that John's not telling Ivor why he's there. And also, Ivor doesn't want to ask him because he, I think in his heart, he probably knows it's not a good thing, good reason why he's here.
Yeah. And that then kind of moves us into that next paragraph, going from like, he could never say if it happened to what's undoubtedly true. I just love that change. And that's a very different kind of language, right? What's undoubtedly true. And I'm like, is that Ivor's voice, right? I'm always interested in third person. I'm like, whose language is that? Is that just the narrator's language, or is that Ivor's language? is how powerfully he was affected in that moment.
Yeah, I think it's both there. I think either, however old he is, I think he'll recognize that. But I think it's something that the third person narrator can kind of lay down as a fact.
Yeah. And I love that kind of that doubleness, right? When we're reading I think third person can do so many things that are really just under the radar, right? You don't notice it happening, but you're kind of pulled in, that nothing perhaps could have quite prepared him for it. Like that also feels like him, right? But then the comma, perhaps comma, then feels like the narrator. Like it feels quite proper as a bit of grammar almost, or I don't know, it kind of slips back and forth. I can't make my mind.
Well, I suppose it's it's the narrator, that perhaps, it's kind of referring back to the past, and we don't know this at this point, but either he does have a family that he loves, and so it's almost there the narrator's kind of standing back and saying, well, I can't know this for sure, but it seems to me that this particular emotion he hasn't been prepared for.
Yeah, it was so long since anyone but Strachan had looked at him properly. And you're just like, wow, that's like quite a statement, really, right? Like not just
anyone
in contemporary language, like wanting to be seen, right? It's not just being seen physically, but like looked at as a person, right? Not just as like a kind of figure or an idea, right? He's on this remote island living on his own.
Yeah.
To many people, he's just, some kind of historical relic kind of, right? Or just a figure. But here there's like a real longing for being like looked at directly. Or like he doesn't know that he wants to be looked at, but he's now realizing that it is a thing.
It is a thing. It's kind of a thing that we're not, obviously we look at ourselves in mirrors, but it's only other people who can look at us.
Yeah.
So, so if there are no other people, then you're never being looked at. I mean, it sounds like a very obvious thing to say, I guess, but it's, that sense of, who we are, that's part of it. And the fact that, probably the last person that looked at him was, the worst person in the world for him, who, wishes him the most ill.
Yeah. But that, I don't think that is quite understated. That's like quite a big, like, who are we in the world, right? Like if we only see ourselves through our own eyes, I wouldn't get a sense of like anything else. Like this is about relationality, not just as
exactly. If you don't ever see the effect you're having, I mean, I can't remember who was it, George Eliot, who said, the last thing we realize is our effect on other people. But it is, you don't see somebody else's facial reaction to something you said. It's just a kind of blank.
So being looked at is like it's like a confirmation of oneself, right? It's like, oh no, I am alive. I am a real 3D being.
Yes. And it's sort of, I mean, I think it's maybe just after this passage where either he kind of goes out into the shed and he kind of looks at his own hand. He's almost kind of shocked into an awareness of his existence almost.
Yeah. It feels like a real transition for him, like not just seeing this other person and seeing the other in their kind of brute reality, but also then seeing himself in a way that I just love this sentence, because you've gone from quite direct sentences to more kind of like soft poetic ones to, and if he'd been asked to describe his feelings, he might have reached for that word in his language that described what happens. It suddenly like unfurls, right, this sentence in the way that, as like what happens when a rock is covered and uncovered by the sea, dash, when, comma, briefly, comma, the water rises up and submerges it. Like the sea washes across this sentence, right? You really let it unfurl in a way that I find really pleasurable. That then it was how Ivor felt when the wave of emotion crashed over him. He was engulfed by it. Like the sentences then they compact again immediately afterwards. It's like and again, this is probably unconscious as you're writing it, but the form and the content are really mirroring.
I think I was conscious that I wanted to kind of raise the music, from this quite flat kind of narrative to just something very emotional and visceral, that kind of mirrored the wave, and then where it crashes over him, and then he breathes again. Yeah.
I like that idea of raising the music. That's a really great phrase.
I think it is a good phrase. I feel that's often I often think of that to myself. I think this is what I need to raise the music here.
And are you like calibrating that in the moment or like in the edits?
That's usually when I'm going back over something, and I'll think. I'll give you another example from Clear. I had sort of finished the book, and there's a very important dance scene which you'll and it worked, but I needed to. Well, there is kind of music in that scene, but I needed to raise the music, so I did go back over that scene, and just wasn't very much that I added, but I wanted it to be more intense.
Yeah, no, that's always interesting to me, like how much is like felt in the moment versus like you take a look back and you're like, oh, this needs something. Because even in this, like raising the music, it's funny because he says like, and if he'd been asked, like whether anyone's ever going to ask him, he might have reached for that word. Like not even he would have used, but he might have, and then reached for the word. Like we don't even know if he'd get to the word. There's such
it's very reticent, very bit sort of British.
Yeah, but it's so emotional at the same time, right? There's something really. I think I love this man. Like he's not real, but like the more you read just words like that, like if he'd been asked, as though no one ever asks him these questions. No one asks about his emotional life or his feelings or his inner world. And he might have reached for a word. I'm like, I'm always trying to reach for words and they don't come. There's something just so like tender about that idea, I think. Yeah, it really got me. I was like, I want you.
I like the word tender. There's a and I did want a tenderness to be in these scenes.
Yeah. And listener, if you've not got like the ending is ecstatic of this book. I was holding my breath. I'll just tell you that, Carys. It is the perfect ending to this book. I didn't know that's where we were going, but I'm so glad
Neither
we went there. When did you realize?
Quite late on. Without giving too much. For a long time, I thought Ivor would die because I couldn't really imagine any other fate for him.
Yeah.
But I suppose I've just always, people have always found a way.
Yeah.
And I think, a couple of people have sort of said that they found it very modern, and I find that slightly strange because, well, it's like people have always found a way. There's really nothing new under the sun.
Right. But I think maybe it's new. I wouldn't call this historical fiction per se, but one could, right? Set in the 1840s, but maybe it's just the sense of like people imagining what people did in the 1840s. I think is probably out of skew, right? I think we're just used to imagining the past in a particular way.
I think so, and people have they had courage and imagination, and they took risks and
desire and like want and all of the things. I mean, not to mention the ending of West, which also destroyed me. So, you do endings very well. But he was engulfed by it. His breathing stopped and there was a long stalled moment before he broke free and breathed again. Again, lots of those B's there throughout that, but very like direct. And then when John Ferguson gestured to him to pass his papers, he gave them to him. And then he sat in his great chair watching him. Like you've gone way back to that almost monosyllabic, sentence structure after this like real, you raised the music and then you really brought the music back down.
Yeah, I suppose what strikes me there is I hadn't reading it now. John Ferguson comes across as even more kind of stiff and almost although he's in a slightly he's the patient here. He's in a somewhat vulnerable situation, but he's still kind of behaving like the more assertive one, and he expects Ivor to pass him his papers, which Ivor does. That sort of struck. It seemed that gesture feels very. I didn't realize how peremptory that might seem. Although it could seem quite a gentle gesture. I don't know. Maybe it's just me reading it now. It seems a little peremptory.
Yeah, but that's the only word in the sentence that I guess you could read. This is what I mean when it becomes more plain, right? It's the only word that like we can read into. The rest of it is so just plain and descriptive.
Yeah.
Even like sat in his great chair watching him.
I think I was aware that could, could convey his great his affection and his interest, but also a little bit of a threat as well. Because we know that Ivor, he's a big guy, and John is, now that he's got here, he is afraid, and so there is that feeling of, well, we don't know what's going to happen here, but how's the balance of power going to work out? So there is something maybe a little threatening, a sense of everything being up for grabs.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of describing the book, though, right? There's so much up for grabs in every chapter, and we're kind of unfolding with them in a way that I'm just obsessed with this book in so many ways. Just such a beautiful, calm moment. And I want to transition now to talk a bit more about your writing. We've hinted this already, but I want to know more about how you literally do this thing. How do you make these books happen? Do you have like a strict writing practice? Are you handwriting, typing?
I mean, I'm strict in the sense that I work not every day, but I work every weekday, and sometimes depending on what's going on, I'll work at the weekends too. But I don't have. I mean, at various times I have had sort of, okay, I'm not going to let myself get up from here until I've written 10 pages. But I did that for a short while when I was writing The Mission House. But normally I don't have a word sort of target or anything like that. I just know that I need to be thinking about it and at my desk. And if I do that, things will happen. So that's the only sort of hard and fast rule I have. I do write mostly by hand for a very long time until I'm really sort of deep into it, and then I'll sort of flip between the two. I'll sort of type everything up, and then even if I've got a chapter that's on the computer and then I want to rewrite it or add something, then I'll go back into my notebook and handwrite the scene, because I think, I don't know, it's fresher. I think if I'm on the computer, I start to delete things, and that's always a big mistake, because I don't think you can ever judge in the moment if something is good or not. And often, I'll come back to something the next day and everything I thought was good isn't, and stuff that I thought was really clunky actually works. So never throw anything away.
Okay, so it's every day if you can, and
yes,
that's like interesting. And revising, like, how many drafts? Because I've read like a lot of people that write short books are kind of writing these really distilled things. I think it was Claire Keegan. I don't know. I heard her on something once that she said she'll like write a draft and then she'll just write it again, but not from the original script.
Yes.
She'll just rewrite the book.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. No, I know. I'm reading Sarah Moss. She writes it, then she deletes it, and then she deletes it from her trash, and then she starts again. No, I don't do that. I keep everything, and I don't really think in terms of draft 1, draft 2, draft 3. It's for me, it's a lot messier. It's a lot more chaotic than that. It's much more, well, I've got this, which I really like and is really working. So I'm going to keep that. And I don't know, I'm just always, it's almost like sort of flicking paint on a canvas, and I'm always sort of flicking new paint and taking, scraping stuff off, and until it's finally there.
Until it feels right.
Mm-hmm.
I used to paint a lot when I was younger, and I'd always be like, there was one too many flicks, and now I can't
Yes,
get rid of it.
exactly.
And now I can't get rid of it, and I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'll look at, I'll sort of look at something. I think, oh no, that chapter, the way I wrote that chapter before, that was much better. So I have endless drafts of paragraphs and pages and chapters.
Yeah.
But I don't sort of have these things called first draft, second draft, third draft.
Okay, I like that. That makes me feel better about my writing practice. Do you have a memory of like first writing, or when you first thought like, I want to be a writer, or whatever that means?
Well, my first real memory of what I used to do, my kids always say to me when I talk about my childhood, they say, "Oh, stop, your childhood sounds so miserable and boring." But I used to make these little books and copy things out. So I have these little tiny copies of The Tempest, for instance, that I don't think it was the whole thing, but it would be sort of, Act 1 and Scene 1, and I'd make the little books and copy them out. And I don't really remember the copying, but I do think copying is as a way of learning is a great thing. I think to copy out a whole short story, for instance, is a really great thing to do, because there's something that you kind of learn about the pacing and the way it's unfolding through the act of writing out the whole story, word for word. So I think there's a lot to be. That's my main memory of making those little books.
I love that. That doesn't sound sad to me. I like this memory.
I didn't think it was sad either. But.
Yeah. Do you teach creative writing in any context? I don't know.
I have. I mean, I don't do it. I don't do it that often, and I suppose I'm not. I'm not that interested in sort of theories of writing. I think what I always want to say to students is just go and find stuff that you love and just read that and read it and read it and read it. So yeah, no, I have, and I've had it's been very I've done at Arvon and done other teaching, but yeah,
do you set like activities or tasks or lessons, or are you kind of more kind of workshopping? And
I do. One of my favorite things to do, I mean, physical things are very important in my writing. So I like to throw a few, physical objects at my students, and they will come up with the most wonderful stories. Just tell them to just really focus on this physical, whether it might be a brooch or a glass bottle or anything, and to really 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 think about this. And they've written wonderful stories based on those. I think physical things are great jumping off points.
It's like a kind of grounding object in a way.
Yes, and investing them with difficulty and emotion.
Yeah, I write more poetry than anything else, and I think often when we're talking about poetry writing, a lesson, I can't remember whoever told me this, so sorry listeners if you are hearing this, but they were kind of like, if you've got an object, like write around the object. Like a poem can write around the object as though you're like don't describe the thing directly, but describe almost the kind of like negative space around the thing without saying like plant pot. Like, how are you writing around the plant pot? How are you making sense of it? And I always thought, that sounds so difficult, but so fascinating.
Yes. Or maybe you do all those things first, and then you just cut that all out.
Yes,
that's your way. That's your way in.
Yeah.
But I think there are some I love. I haven't read it yet, but Elizabeth McCracken, who's one of my favorite writers, has a new book out about writing. And I would read anything that she just writes with such sort of sound common sense, and she's funny, and so I would read anything she wrote about writing.
Right, that's a really good recommendation. Do you have other essays or books on writing that you go back to or recommend?
As I say, I don't sort of I'm not really into theory, I suppose, is what I'd say. But
Yeah.
if I recommended anything, it would be Elizabeth McCracken.
Yeah.
And it's called A Long Game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And read the writers that you are drawn to, as you say.
Exactly. And read them again and again, and if they're copy them out, and kind of feel what that feels like by kind of osmosis.
Yeah. I'm going to go and try that tonight. That sounds like a really good activity. Okay, the last question I ask everyone.
Yes.
Do you have books that you want to recommend? They could be old things that you return to. They could be new things, stuff that's not out yet.
Yeah. Well, I when we were in touch before, you'd said to me, did I feel that there were any books that mine were in dialogue with?
Yeah.
And my initial response was sort of, well, no, not really. Probably just each other, but there's a book that I came to very late. A friend recommended to me by Sylvia Townsend Warner called Mr. Fortune's Maggot. I don't know if you know it.
No, I haven't read that.
And I absolutely loved it. It's this story about a bank clerk who becomes a missionary and goes off to a remote island, and he makes one convert. And it's this young boy, and it's the story of him and this young convert. And Mr. Fortune, I most of my books, for whatever reason, I seem very drawn to these men of a certain age who are, rather flawed, quite complicated and ill-equipped to deal with the situations that they're put into. And I did feel a real connection with Mr. Fortune. So I love that book. I would recommend that.
Great.
I'm reading a novel called Fonseca by Jessica Kane. I think it came out last year, and my French editor actually recommended it to me because she's publishing it in French next year. And she knew that one of my literary heroines is Penelope Fitzgerald, and Fonseca is a novel about something that happened in Penelope Fitzgerald's life. She was always short of money, and it's this crazy story about a legacy that a letter arrives, and there's a possibility that her son might be going to inherit some money from a couple of rich old ladies in South America. So she and her son go to South America, and it's a really delightful novel, and it has a kind of really has the spirit of Penelope Fitzgerald's writing. It's kind of funny and has a very light touch. It's really lovely. I would recommend. It's out in English. I'd recommend that.
Both great recommendations. I love hearing the things that people recommend. Carys, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate you and talking about this book, which I'm obsessed with. So thank you for doing this.
That was a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Go back to episode 1 with Olivia Sujic if you want another taut book that's almost a kind of two-hander like Clear is, or go to episode 27 with Tori Peters for a long short story or short novella which is about a very different kind of male intimacy. Please subscribe if you haven't already, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube, share with people in all the places, tag me in any posts of episodes you like, and fill out the feedback form if you can. You can also get more information by subscribing to the Substack. The show was made possible by an Impact Accelerator Award from the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the University of Hertfordshire.